Salutations everyone, my name is Kervane and this is my coding channel where I discuss the soft sides of coding. First, a little about me. I started coding when I was in 7th grade. Actually, it was even earlier than that since my county was with the whole worldwide day of code thing back when coding was going to be the next big thing. But that was just blocks and admittedly I probably wouldn't have gotten invested as soon as I did had I started with that. However, if this video gets enough engagement, I could talk about my coding days from scratch too. Back to the story. Basically, I went to a charter school for STEM stuff, and Python 2 was a language taught there. It was love at first sight for me. I didn't know a lick about all the future projects I would end up getting into, but after I took the class, I knew I didn't want to stop. I liked playing around with if statements, and remember that the longest piece of code I ever wrote at the time for an assignment ended up being around 200 words. I also remember it being overkill with it from the very beginning. It was then when I made up my mind that my career would be based around programming. And 8 years later, that is still sort of my thing to this day. At the very least, my love only grew. Funny enough though, the code that I'm talking about doesn't start in Python. My personal growth started when I went into Code Academy and took my very first lessons in C++. It was there that I learned the basics, and some fiddling around later, I created my very first calculator. By my current standards, and trust me, we're going to get to those at some point, this code is not just pale, it is anemic to the point of death. But we all have to start somewhere, so let's start by looking at the variables I created. As you can see, I start with a line welcoming the user to my calculator, then create 5 variables. The operation variable is what I'm going to use to hold the choice of arithmetic that the user wants to do. Num1 and num2 hold the numbers I will use in the operation, and the outcome holds, well, the outcome. Note that it's the only double variable in this entire program. And expo? Well, I want you guys and gals and in-betweens to guess in the comment section and see if you're right later. Just imagine, what could this value be for? Pause if you need to. Next, we move on to the operation. A basic use of cin and cout is here to ask the user for the number of the operation, and there are new line escapes after each number to show each option on a different line. Finally, the input of the cin gets moved into the operation variable. Finally, we have the juicy stuff. 4 if statements represent each operation. As said earlier, the outcome will take the result of each of the statements, and the 3 main variables are printed in an output, given the specific number for the operation. The last if statement represents the exponent rising. If you guess that the exponent will be a counter tracking how many times a number is multiplied, then you guessed right. The while loop runs until the expo variable is equal to num2, and then an output is printed. And that's it. After it returns 09 to call the last interrupt, the program ends. But let's be honest, this program is very bare bones, insecure, and probably gave you all the ick if we're being real. The set of declarations is fine. I'm not too familiar with the explicit memory allocation yet, so maybe there's a better way to initialize these variables, but nothing sticks out to me. The asking for an input is kind of fine, but if you were to show this to a random person, to them it will just look like the program crashed and they'll have no idea that they were supposed to enter an input unless you pointed it out. In fact, this is what it looks like when I run the program several years later. Without the 5, it's just empty space. Same thing for all of the inputs, actually. And don't even get me started on the if statements. No if else, no else. With this, the compiler thinks it has to go through every single statement to run arithmetic. Let me be clear. I explicitly coded it like that way when I assumed that it just chooses one super quick because C++ compilers are super fast, I heard. I'm frankly lucky that nothing broke. There's also no input validation. And can we talk about the output for the exponent? I didn't even realize that was a problem back then. But tell me a layman user will understand what 1.98323E314 means. I don't even think that's the right number. 2 raised to the power of 8 is 256, which is 2.56 times 10 squared in scientific notation. 314 is nowhere to be found, so this is just completely wrong. So, my program has problems that range from slight modifications to holy carpal tunnel syndrome. I'm getting fired. So, what gives? Was the first program I wanted to start this channel with. My magnum opus that kicked off my road to stardom in the development world. Should I really be making YouTube content using these examples? Yes, yes, and yes. You see, everything before this was just me having fun reviewing my code. The half that is happening right now is the reason I wanted this channel. It is that I want to show people like you, and me from all those years ago, the mental and emotional aspects of programming and why I love it so much. This was the first program I made outside of school or some tutorial. There was no guide here, there was no ChatGPT to help me, no Stack Overflow user breathing down my neck asking if my code is rage bait. It was just me on a small laptop that my mom bought me, making something for the sake of doing it. When I finished it, I showed it off to my parents, who probably weren't that all impressed, but were happy to see that I was doing something neat and admittedly getting into something that could be their retirement plan. By the way, not endorsing that. That is a very stressful thing to put on your child. Uh, I didn't even have a full IDE like I do now. I looked up a bunch of compilers online, and for the longest time, I was just using online GDB. I didn't even know what the GDB in that meant, or that return 0 was the representation of the assembly interrupt hex code 0x80 to officially end the program with whatever error message was left in the B register. I didn't even know the underlyings of C out, or what that stood for either. I just knew that round pegs fit into round holes, and if I try to fit square pegs into triangle holes, then I will be hit with red messages, and red is bad, and that is completely okay. You see, when you start out with coding, you probably had these when you started out with coding, you probably had these same feelings. You probably were just having fun and didn't realize that years later you would truly understand how your program worked under the hood. You were probably just as happy as me when I created this simple code that exploded the moment I put the letter A. And if you were, that is great. And if you're still in that phase of your coding hobby, enjoy it. Keep running into walls and learning to run around them. Don't worry about hash maps or secure coding or all these fancy concepts, because if you don't have fun with the basics and if you don't fall on your butt a couple of times, I can't imagine how you're going to feel once I start talking about the Windows registry. Lastly, if you don't relate to this at all, that's also fine. We all get into coding for different reasons. This was part of mine, and whatever you have is also great as well. I don't want to origin story shame here, as long as it's your reason, right? That's the video though. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and be on the lookout for video 2. Alright, salutations!